Hey everybody, it's Ben. So, have you ever wondered what it would take to build a groundbreaking legal career that empowers solo and small law firms across the country? Well, Carolyn Elefant knows. In this episode of This Legal Life, Carolyn takes us from the early days in the legal field to the moment she decided to launch her own law practice and then eventually go on and create My Shingle, a platform that's really changed how the solo law landscape looks. This is the first time that I ever heard about Carolyn, and it's been great to see this journey. We'll also talk about generative AI, the rise of LinkedIn for meaningful connections as a solo, and how lawyers can harness their unique voice through content creation. If you're curious about the adapting nature of the changing legal economy, especially for solo and small law firms, this is absolutely the episode for you. So let's go ahead and dive in right now. All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Ben Chiriboga, the Chief Growth Officer here at Nexel, coming to you with another This Legal Life. This Legal Life is where I get to sit down and talk to people about their life in legal and the lessons that they've learned. Today, I'm very, very excited to be speaking with Carolyn Elefant, who is the founder, owner of her own law firm, and many, many other things that we are going to get into, including myshingle.com, which many of you probably actually know Carolyn from. Carolyn, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we were talking off script. You know, This Legal Life is all around people and their legal lives, and you've had a very big legal life, and I was just catching up with you off of recording about one of your latest forays, which is you're going to tell us very briefly about it as a case. What's the terminology? Case manager?
A hearing officer, actually.
A hearing officer. There we go. A hearing officer. And tell me about the regulatory body or the administrative body that you're doing this for.
An agency called DC Water that regulates water and sewer charges in the District of Columbia.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to talk about that, but much more, including just your life in legal. But I think it's an interesting vignette because whenever I think about you, you've really done quite a few things, both on the founder, owner, law office side, as well as the blog, and you've done it for a very, very long time. So we'll get into all of that. I'm very excited to speak with you. So before we get started, you know, whenever I approached you about the podcast and whenever you think about your legal life, what's some of the vignettes that come up in your mind?
Well, I think that it's been something I've been doing longer than I thought I would. So I guess that's one thing. I guess I still think of myself as still learning. I mean, I know I'm a very experienced practitioner in, you know, some of the subject matter areas that I do, but I still feel in many instances that things are still new because I try to always take new cases. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. So in many ways, I don't feel that much more experienced than somebody who's just a couple of years out of school. And I like feeling that way. Makes me feel fresh and young.
Yes. Talking about fresh and young and doing new things, we're kind of scrambling and we'll start at the beginning. But, you know, another new thing that I know, and again, this is just another vignette of what I think about whenever I think. I've been following you for a while on LinkedIn. I've read things on My Shingle for a while. You kind of, whenever I was getting into practicing myself, I ran across My Shingle and some of the resources. So thank you to you. This was almost 10 years now at that point in time. But, you know, for instance, talking about new and fresh things in your practice, you recently put out a AI course for generative AI for lawyers. Like, you know, what at this point in your career, what's important about that, and what's important about doing new, fresh things for purposes of your career today? Like, what's behind that? What's the why behind that?
So I feel like generative AI is kind of going to be my last act here. I mean,
yeah.
So much more disruption that I can wait for in legal. I don't want to be doing this when I'm 90 years old. But I just feel like, you know, generative AI reminds me of how I felt when the World Wide Web came out 20 years ago. You knew it was going to change things. You knew it was like this amazing, you just looking at it, you could tell it was this amazing new thing. And I feel the same way about generative AI, and I want to like kind of be here at the threshold to help shepherd it in. And I feel like that's something I'm really good at and doing in legal, because since I'm a practicing attorney, I have credibility with lawyers, but because I'm not afraid to use the technology, I also have like the subject matter knowledge. I actually use it instead of just telling people why they shouldn't use it. So I'd like to see this get adopted before I go out. And plus, I mean, there is a selfish issue to it too, because not only, generative AI is making legal work easier for everybody, and it makes it easier for somebody who's older too. I mean, when you've been practicing law a long time, writing a brief for the 97,000th time is so boring, drudgery. And the thing is AI can help save you from that. So I find that it's making me more productive at a later stage in my career, where just because I've done things so many times over and over, I'm less productive at them or less efficient at them.
Okay. All right. Well, those are a couple little vignettes that sort of, I think, frame the conversation. So now let's get into our time machine. And I want to go all the way back to the year 1998. So we're a couple years before the internet. Very exciting. Before my shingle, all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. And we're at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where you spent a year and almost 2 years as an attorney advisor. Now, this would go on to be very important because energy has been kind of an underbelly of your practice. I mean, right. for the entire time, and it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably still your core focus within your practice today. Yeah.
Right.
But let's go back there. You're fresh out of law school, and you're sort of walking into the government and all of that. What were your hope and aspirations for your career? How were you thinking about your career at that point in time? And then also, what did it mean in the early 90s to have a legal career versus, maybe we're going to get obviously to what we're doing in 2024, almost 34 years. So that was a compound question, but you'll take it apart. Yeah. Bring us back.
So I started at FERC actually in August 1988. So it was however many years ago this month. And I still remember my first day because I met another guy there. We were both there just a year, but we were still friends 34 years later. So it just goes to show that you can meet people anywhere. And that's something that I just had never even occurred to me. I mean, when you're starting your first job out of law school, you're not thinking about making friends at it or socializing or what you're going to do. So I was just eager to do stuff. And I discovered that in the office I was in, FERC is a really respected agency now, but back then it was a little bit backwater. And so it had a lot of people who were kind of riding out their time. And so nobody was doing any work. So when they saw the newcomer coming in who was eager to get work done, they just gave me all the big cases. So
yeah,
I had some of the naughtiest problems in the office. And that was really what I wanted to do. I just wanted to get as much experience as possible, get as much client contact as possible. Whenever people would call from the public to ask questions, I worked in the division that regulated hydroelectric dams. And so those impact a lot of landowners. They impact people who are involved in recreation. So they have a lot of impacts, and people would call if there was a project being proposed and they'd want to know how they could intervene or how they could protect themselves. And I'd spend hours with them on the phone. And then I would be reprimanded. I was told that they should hire their own lawyers. And I said, I thought I was their lawyer. They're paying for me. Yeah. I mean, it was clear to me that fortunately you can't be fired from the government because I was not a very compliant new attorney. But one of the things that I did when I was there, though, it also, because my schedule wasn't as intense as like working at Big Law, it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of pro bono cases. And the pro bono cases were in DC. And at that time, if you worked for the federal government, you weren't allowed to do pro bono cases that involved DC agencies because it was considered a conflict. DC was considered a federal body. And so that kind of ruled out. I was working for the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. So all the homeless people had issues, with the DC Employment Commission, the Housing Commission, things like that. And so I thought that was not a good idea. So I wrote this law review article about this conflict of interest statute and how it should be changed. And this law professor, and it got published. That was the first exciting thing, was I got a law review article published. And then a law professor took it. Well, she wrote her own article. At least she cited mine, but I was the first to do it. But somehow she got it, or somehow the article got to Congress. and they changed the law and they made it so that there's no more conflict of interest. So that was very exciting too, because I kind of learned, gave me a lot of
Yeah.
confidence to change things even really early on in my career. And that's something I always remember throughout, that even though you're just like one person, there's still a lot
Yeah.
you can do.
Yes. Oh man. Okay. Well, you have a very long list of experiences, and your CV is very long. So we're gonna have to take some of this in bunches. But um, I know that there's much more about FERC just in and of itself. What a name, FERC. FERC. It just it's
I know.
incredible. But at some point, you decide to go into private practice,
Yeah.
and Duncan and Allen, and this is, of course, a big transition in people. Can you tell us a little bit, how old are you? What are you thinking about? What were some sort of the driving factors behind that? There's a lot of young people who sort of listen to this or are going back and forth, of course. And today, the back and forth between in-house and law firms is such a big lateral sort of shift. How did you think about moves like this back then?
So back then, so the one thing that I was afraid of at FERC was staying too long. Like I said, I had met that friend of mine who was there for a year. He had wanted to be a prosecutor and do criminal defense, and he'd gotten a job at the Pennsylvania State Attorney's Office after being at FERC for a year. So he left. So that was kind of my model, was seeing people leave. Plus, my first day, when I got out of the elevator, there was a guy who had been there for like 40 years, and he said, leave as fast as you can.
Oh my
Don't
God.
stay too long,
What?
just be me. So I kind of had that was the context that I had. Now,
Yeah, right.
if I were at at government agency today, I probably would not have been in such a hurry to leave. What I probably would have done is maybe networked with people. FERC is a big agency and has a lot of divisions. It had a litigation division. It had a solicitor's office that did appellate work. And I think I probably would have networked with other people and maybe tried to pick up some new experience. So I think if I were advising anybody, I would have them do that. But I was coming at it from the perspective that my shelf life was limited. So when I got this opportunity to go to a private firm, I just took it. And I was so by that time I was probably I guess I was like 26, and it was an all male firm. There were no female lawyers. And it was doing a lot of work for public co-ops and a lot of communities that used water in the West. There were communities that were buying power from the Hetch Hetchy Dam in Yosemite and from the Grand Canyon, not the dam at Grand Canyon, I can't remember, Glen Canyon Dam near Grand Canyon. And so it was very kind of eclectic work, but it was really interesting, especially learning the history of the dams and the building of them, and the communities that popped up around it. So I was just thinking, I guess I wasn't really thinking of being on partnership track. I was just thinking of staying there until I got to the next gig. I mean, back then it was just about moving, just moving forward and not getting stuck somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I before we jump to the next, there's a lot here. Adjunct professor, and then moving to another firm. It seemed like a smaller firm, but a little bit more prestigious in terms of maybe the practice. I want to ask you how, if you would go back and give advice to yourself at that point in time, would you have said anything different? Did you feel like you did it right? In some sense, there's such a through line in terms of your focus on energy in your practice. But would you have thought about things a little bit differently with the benefit of, 30 something years of experience now?
I don't know if I would have changed the early part of my career, except like I said, maybe stayed at government a little bit longer, or maybe tried a little harder to get a job at Department of Justice. I mean, I was so impatient, and those jobs just took so long to move, or figured out ways to network. I mean, all of these things are, because of things like LinkedIn and these online mentoring groups, you have access, and these things come second nature. And I know that I've mentored people or given them suggestions that have helped them find positions. So, but I don't know that I would have changed that part. I might have changed the course of my trajectory when I started my own firm, because when I started my firm, I was doing energy work, and technology was kind of, coming up with AOL and Prodigy and things like that. And I felt like I wasn't techie enough to do tech law, because at that time, the people who were doing tech law were computer scientists turned lawyers. But I think I might have maybe changed over to that because it's always been, had been more interesting. But I can't,
Yeah.
I can't regret the energy stuff either because I did really interesting work in the energy field too. And so,
Yeah.
I don't have any regrets, but that might have been something that I might have thought about. I might have thought about changing, making a more dramatic, substantive change in the area of law that
I feel you. That was with the benefit of things like LinkedIn, and fast forward, 20 something years, that was one of my major leverages and one of my major things that I pulled whenever I wanted to make a huge substantive shift, and it was, of course, I had the benefit of all of this and that was available. But yeah, I take your
yeah,
point definitely.
yeah,
I let's let's jump now and let's take things like moving to the law office of Scott Hempling, and then eventually let's bring us up to like My Shingle and Solo by Choice and what you were thinking about then, and contextualize it, historicize it for us in terms of you bring a, and I know the internet and the sort of the advent of the internet has always been really big for this kind of like platform jump that you've kind of made, and the branding and just your mindset around the Solo. So bring us up to there, what's happening, and then bring us up to kind of the founding of My Shingle, and of course your own practice and hanging your own shingle.
Yeah. So my own practice came quickly. I was at that firm of Duncan and Allen actually for 3.5 years, and I was told I wasn't partner material. I always like to say I was not associate material because I was basically doing what I wanted to do. If I didn't want to follow up on a case, I didn't do that. So I was not good associate material. I was told I had 6 months to leave, and I looked around, and I guess again, it was the thing with the job search taking a long time. So I had thought about starting a law firm. And so I thought, I might as well just do it now. I had just gotten married. And even though we bought a house, I felt confident that I could at least like make enough to pay the bills. So that was when I started my firm. And that's the one point where I still continued to do energy work, but I started doing like all kinds of other cases. I did a court-appointed criminal work. Back at that time in DC, you could literally just walk into the courtroom and give you cases. I mean, now it's so competitive. You have to, show that you've had years of litigation. But I mean, I was very conscientious. I took a class that the public defender taught. They gave us these big notebooks that I would tote into the courtroom all the time. They were like this high. So, and then while I had my own firm after a couple of years, there was another attorney, Scott Hempling, who was doing energy work, and he needed somebody to do, work as a contract associate. So I worked for his firm and I was of counsel for that for like 10 years. But he was also very forward looking because when I worked for him, it was part-time and I just had my first daughter. And there were a couple of times when he wanted me to do more work and I didn't have childcare for her. So he had a nanny for his son. He worked from home even back then. I mean, this was like, again, in the mid-90s, he was working from home.
Yeah.
And he had a nanny for his son. So he said that the nanny would watch my daughter too. So I would drive to his house and work out of his office. And he had childcare built in. So he was very ahead of it.
Wow. Yeah, there's something there for all the solos piecing things together around the world, nanny services on demand or something
right,
like this. That's a benefit. Yeah. So then, okay, so take us up to My Shingle and sort of what's the where is the internet? What are you thinking about?
Yeah.
Many, as well as I do, there are many attorneys, many solos in the world. Small, I mean, it's the backbone of basically the entire legal industry around the world, effectively. Most don't even start a blog, let alone take the meta position of like, what is this around the idea of solos being important? Were you scratching your own itch? Were you just trying to, but walk us through this. I'm everybody who knows this knows I'm very partial to the hero's journey as kind of like a mental model. And, the hero's journey always has to be pushed into starting the journey by something. So in your case, was that the internet that pushed you to start your journey? It was
the internet and seeing the rise of all these big websites that were getting funded, based on an idea on a napkin, like the toiletpaper.com or the pets.com, or I guess pets.com has at one point.
The 90s, woo!
I remember buying stuff early on Amazon. And so I came up with this idea of starting a website that would be everything for solo and small firm practitioners. And that was like in
Yeah.
2000. And at that time, I tried to hire somebody to code the website. I hired somebody from Elance, which was a precursor to Upwork, and they did a
Yeah.
horrible job. But whoever I hired to do the logo did an amazing job. Not the logo I have now, but the logo I had for a long time. She did a really good
Mm,
job. So that just never came to pass. And then blogging started to come on the scene. And my husband used to read a tech blog called Slashdot, which had its own, like, it had an out of the box coding language that he could install, but I would be able to do it to put it
mm,
together. So we thought that I could use that as the platform for the site. So when I launched it, though, by that time, like, these universal websites weren't a thing anymore, and people were just
right.
blogging for free. And so I joined the first wave of lawyer bloggers who were blogging for
Yes.
free. The focus of the blog. So, I mean, there was information on solo and small firm practice. Most of it was in the Jay Foonberg book, which is it's a huge tome, and it's very nuts and boltsy about, like, marketing, client development, and things like that. And those things are really important. But I thought, there was a bigger question about, like, the role that solos and small firms play in access to justice and the larger
Mm,
questions of what they do. And I also thought that it was something to celebrate more and to spotlight more. I mean, because a lot of people who would start firms would just refer to themselves as, like, oh, I'm just a solo practitioner, or, these very small people, when they had such a big influence on the legal
mm,
profession. I wanted to make it something. And I also wanted more people to know about solo practice as an option, because I went to to a top law school, and everybody in my class went to big firms. I mean, there were one or two people who started their own practice, and nobody realized that it was a viable option. So I wanted to also put out information that would, make it clear that this is something you could do. And it sounds so crazy now, because now you can't, spend a second on LinkedIn without seeing somebody who's running their own kind of neat little firms doing something really
sure.
interesting. But back
Yeah.
then, it was like a wasteland, and you didn't, if you worked at a big law especially, you just never encountered law firm owners. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so that
Oh
was the
my
impetus
goodness.
behind it all.
So interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about, just really quick aside, when you think of LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn particularly as kind of this platform for allowing for kind of the rise of solos, and then of course we can talk about technology and blah blah blah, and all of this kind of like is doing, you know, what my question is really, like, you've had this long career. What's some of the viability? Where are solos today? That's the real question. Like, the viability of being a solo. One of my things is I truly believe, naively, but there we go, that everybody, with what we have today, combined with just the impetus of how you run a solo practice, you can really develop a practice that is unique to you in almost any way. Is that a fair statement? Do you think that that's where kind of like solo and small practices sort of are today? And is that your experience with your own kind of practice over the course of these years?
So that's definitely been my experience with my practice, because I really didn't have another model. I knew when I started my firm, I was being fired from a job. I knew I still wanted to practice law. I wanted to get in a courtroom, and there were, issues that I wanted to pursue. So I knew that my firm was going to be built in a way that I was going to be able to work on things that were interesting to me. So I had a very self-focused
Yes.
practice. But, and there are a lot of practices like that, where somebody has, a desire to do a particular type of work, or where maybe they have a family situation that, can be supported by doing like estate planning, or
Mm,
tax law or something like that. They can come up with like a practice like that. But then there's also been, I think, through LinkedIn and the internet, there's also been the rise of, like, this whole idea of starting a firm and scaling a firm. And I think that
yeah.
what I see also now that I wasn't seeing back when I started, and I knew it happened. I mean, there were people who grew their law firms, but I'm also seeing a lot of people who are starting off, with one or two person firms and growing them to 5 or 10 people, and then
Mm,
talking about, building firm cultures and encouraging
Sure.
employees and supporting them. You see a lot of that discussion on LinkedIn too. So you're seeing like the
Mm,
whole range of different types of solo practices, the ones that start small and grow into something, the ones that are, I mean, I don't want to call them lifestyle firms because they're not lifestyle. I don't consider my
sure.
firm, I mean, my firm influenced national policy and, made precedent at appellate courts. I don't think that's just a lifestyle. And I just get
Right.
sensitive about that because I've been insulted about that by opponents. So,
Mm,
but
yes. Right.
but I
Right.
guess these smaller niche firms that are intended to stay small or focused or very niche, and then these bigger
Mm,
ones that are scaled. So you see the whole gamut of them, and I think that's really exciting.
yes.
And then new
Totally.
new business models too. So
Absolutely. And we can get into that as well. So let's go back to my shingle and just tell me about the experience of running that and just let me go back. How long have you been doing it? So 20 years, right? So 20 years.
that is
What drove you? What kept you going over the course of 20 years? And it's a labor of love, but I know that there's obviously a commercial component as well to it. And yeah, just like how did it the first question is how did it evolve? What sort of motivated you to in the early years? Was it external? Was it internal? Yeah, how did you think
the
of that?
early years. It was so exciting. Having I loved having a voice and having people read it. In the early years, I had like maybe like 10 readers 10 readers on a good day or something like
Right.
that. But and I had so much to say because I'd been practicing by myself. The only other, viewpoints out there about solo practice was like, the standard ABA voice. And I had so many
Yeah.
ideas I wanted to talk about in terms of solo practice in women and law firm
Mm,
ownership and empowerment, ethics, disproportionate enforcement, all these things. So I just always had something to say. And it was like, I mean, it was so exciting. I remember my fingers just like flying on the keyboard. It could be late at night and I could be writing a post. And then there were other people in the blogosphere. The blogosphere was very small back then. So people would
mm,
actually debate with each other and they would have
yeah.
these discussions and debates. And there's this one guy, what was I can't remember what his name was, David Giacalone. I can't remember the name of his blog.
Mm,
It was like Ethical Esquire or something. And he would always,
yes.
be very critical of some of my posts. And I loved that because it inspired me to be better. And people would always say, oh, that guy's a jerk. And I'm like, no, he's, taking
Yeah.
the time to show the other side and we can engage in this debate and still be very respectful of each other. We're very friendly behind the scenes. So it was just in those early days, it was so exciting. I got sued at one point. There was this guy who sued a whole bunch of bloggers. That was back in like, I don't know, it was like 10 or 15 years ago, who
What?
he was a New York lawyer who handled a case in DC and he got disqualified for ineffective assistance of counsel. And so people wrote
And
blog posts criticizing him or saying
oh, okay, got it, got it. Right, yes.
handle a criminal case if you don't know what you're doing because the judge is not always going to is not going to be fortuitous and like deem you so ineffective that you're going to get bounced. So he sued everybody who wrote a blog post, including me. He brought this big lawsuit. So we banded together and we hired two defamation lawyers and the law, the litigation went on. But like things like that would happen. Law.com had hired somebody to do a blog, the first blog for law.com or whatever it was called back then, like ALM Media or so. I can't remember
Hmm.
what it was called. And so the woman, Lisa Stone, who was doing it, reached out to people who were bloggers, and she reached out to me to put my blog on this national podium. And that was really
Mm,
exciting. So it was just like all these things would happen. I would go to conferences and people had heard of my blog. It led to speaking engagements. And
mm,
it was just a really exciting time. I was very engaged and there were just unlimited ideas. I never had writer's block. I never had a day
mm,
when I mean, I didn't post every day, but I post pretty
mm.
frequently. And there's just never a time when I couldn't not come up with something to say. So
Yes.
it was a great time. It was a renaissance.
Wow. So, uh, okay, so that was kind of the early years. Since then, of course, my shingle has sort of evolved in
Yeah.
many respects. How did you think about evolving it, And then, well, I'll ask you that question, and then I have another question about how you balance between this and your practice, and then specifically, like, how did it work marketing wise for your practice as well? I'll ask that question, but let's talk about that. Let's kind of talk about like the evolution and how did you think about the evolution?
So I This was the, it's funny because when I started the blog, I actually had a marketing plan. I had like a 25-page marketing plan, all these ways I was going to raise money and
Right.
have advertising. And then, like I said, when I launched, people were blogging for free. So over time, I just kind of took advantage of things opportunistically. The Nolo Books reached out to me. They wanted to be like a
Yeah.
factor of the blog, and they flew me out to Berkeley to like go to their offices, and they let me take as many Nolo books as I wanted. I took like 20 of them. I love Nolo. I love the brand. I met the guy who founded it, who's, so notorious because he got prosecuted for unauthorized practice of law for writing
Yes.
books that actually explain the divorce process. Like, what a
Mm.
criminal. Um,
We'll put that aside. Hot take.
yeah.
Wow, hot take. Spicy.
I would support it. And then I've worked with other brands like Above the Law and Lawyerist that would they either like paid me something and then they would syndicate part of it, or I would do a call. I had like a lot of those kinds of things over the years. And I didn't really think seriously about a business model. I mean, I kind of toyed, I knew I didn't want to do coaching, and that was like one of the business models that was around at the time. And I couldn't really come up with a justification for paid subscription. I didn't have enough readers. So I just kind of just took advantage, if an opportunity presented itself, I would take advantage of it. And that was really the full extent of it.
Yeah. So how did this work with your practice? Like, how did you, in your mind, how did it support it? Did it lead to direct readers? I mean, did clients, I mean, I mean, it's what were the, how did it kind of keep itself together over all these years?
So it was actually so separate that somebody once asked me, they said, there's this Carolyn Elefant who writes a solo blog and you do energy. And I said, oh, it's the same person. They said, I wasn't sure of that. Some people thought I was, there was virtually almost no crossover. I mean, once in a while I did meet a very close colleague who had been working at a big energy firm, and he had to start his own firm. And so somebody had given him my book, and then he called me and we met, and we wound up doing a lot of energy work together. That was like the closest extent of somebody who was familiar with my solo work, who I actually worked with professionally.
Wow, interesting.
Even now, a lot of times I'll see female colleagues of mine who start their own energy firms. I have a special affinity for them, and I'll send them, call them up and congratulate them, or send them an email. And I'm not even sure that they're aware of all of the resources that I have on solo and small firm practice. In fact, just this past April, I spoke on a panel for the Energy Bar Association on starting a law firm with 3 other solo colleagues. And that was the first time in all these years of practice that I did something for the Energy Bar that related to, like the My Shingle stuff. So yeah, so they have been on 2 separate paths. But I always saw, for me, the My Shingle, I don't want to call it a hobby because I took it much more seriously and it got a much more serious reception. But that was like my fun stuff, like instead of like reading books or novels or going to movies, I would blog or look for fodder for my blog. I mean, I got so much pleasure from it. So it was really my fun time. It was my downtime.
Yeah. I hear you. Okay. Let's maybe jump to, we've bring us up to date with sort of your practice. Let's jump back from My Shingle to your practice. What the question really is, how did you start to develop your practice? And, you're in it whenever it comes to solo by choice. What are you doing from the perspective of marketing, business development? Just, how are you thinking about the work? How is work coming to you over this period of time? And how are you thinking about where you want sort of that practice to go throughout some sort of period of time? It's a question about evolution as you're getting deeper and deeper and kind of setting roots, I think, in terms of what looks to be kind of like a long-term play. I'm assuming you start to get this idea that you're not going to jump into big law or something like that. So you're not going to take your book of business into something. So how are you preparing yourselves for sort of a long road in this case?
So I guess I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. My practice has sort of evolved. Like I said, for a long time, I did renewable energy work. I was doing work mostly with ocean renewable developers. And I co-founded a trade association that I worked with for about 10 years. And so that got my name into the limelight for renewable energy. And I was working on a lot of think tank papers for Department of Energy, doing advising companies. And then I guess the funding for marine renewables dried up and that work went elsewhere. And I started focusing more on doing work with landowners and pipelines. And I was doing that for a long time. And now that has been taken over by a lot of environmental groups. I mean, in the beginning, the reason I got those clients was because environmental groups wouldn't help them because they actually supported gas. They feel differently now. So I kind of laid the foundation for these appeals. And now, but now they've kind of been taken over. So I'm thinking about, what other practice areas. I mean, there's still some of these environmental justice cases that I handle, and I'm still thinking about how much more viable it is for me to do that or to focus on some other areas of energy. Like I said, before we got on the phone, I told you I was also doing some cases as a hearing examiner for DC Water, which is a regulatory agency. And so that's like giving me experience. I guess these days I'm looking, as much for new types of experience or opportunities to do new things as I am for the substance. So that's given me a chance to kind of act as an adjudicator. Last year, I worked on a big case for the Office of People's Counsel in Maryland, where I got to lead rate case litigation and save the ratepayers of Maryland $33 million. So that was like another kind of case that I'd been involved in rate cases before, but never, it's always been like an outside or a tangential issue, never like the big central lead of the case. So I'm kind of looking for things like that. But I'm also looking, I've been practicing for a long time, and I'm not sure how much more traditional practice I want to do. I think I really want to focus on, what AI is doing to the profession and kind of focus more on some of the training and the courses that I've been developing, because I don't want to miss that opportunity. Like I said, I kind of wished I had done the technology stuff many years ago. And while I don't have regrets, I do have a second opportunity. So,
yeah. Before we get to the last half of this, and you've been so gracious with your time, I want to talk about LinkedIn as kind of the next platform, in terms of course, there was the internet, and then there's blogging, and then there was social media, and you're very, very present on social media. And how did you come to it? How has it worked alongside of you? And then more importantly, I think LinkedIn for lawyers specifically has really changed over the last 3 to 5 years in terms of how people are conceptualizing and thinking about it. What does it mean to you? And where does it play a role right now in your practice and just your legal life, effectively?
Yeah. Because I was on such a long time ago, and it's like all the things that I do. I get on really early, nobody's there. 5 years go by, I'm frustrated, I leave or forget about it. And that kind of happened with LinkedIn. I mean, for a long time, it really, and you would have thought in my industry, it would have been, in energy, there would have been some feedback or some engagement. So, but now I think, I guess maybe some of it happened during COVID or before that. I don't know when it started to get its game back, because also for a long time, lawyers were I remember there were tools that they were developing to just kind of push out generic content, doing it automatically instead of, posting engaging posts, which is kind of what hits now. So, so that's been a really good way to meet a broader range of people, and also meet people between generations, because there's young people, there's older people. I mean, when you're on Instagram or something, it's more it trends younger. If you're still on a listserv, there are listservs still out there. It's mostly older people, very much older people. So it really cuts across the generations, I think.
Yes.
I think it's just such a great tool, just having access to something like that. And people have reached out to me through LinkedIn, young attorneys asking for advice on starting and getting into the energy field, which I really enjoy.
Yes, totally. It's unique from the perspective of it combines sort of this 24-hour networking party
Yeah.
with a publishing platform, which, and then very scaled with algorithms to connect you. That's those three things are very unique that you can't get off of listserv, or you can't get off of blogging. It's unique in that way. This is why
Yeah.
it sort of brings these three things together. It's yeah, incredibly powerful. um I want to wrap up talking about some lessons. And, the first lesson is, or the first thing I want to get sort of your feedback on is really what's been critical for you, or meaningful. That's what I meant. More not critical, meaningful over the course of the last 30 years as you've sort of developed your practice. Like what's the thing that you remember the most over that time?
I think just being able to be at the forefront of issues and be lay the foundation for change in the different fields that I've worked in. That's something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah. The let's move to my shingle and just the idea of content and using your voice, and using platforms that allow for you to connect. What's if you were guiding a young attorney today who were thinking about, okay, blogging, LinkedIn, but whatever it is, however, but the importance of content, and also the importance of an individual's voice on sort of a matter, what would you guide that person to? What would you tell them, and how would you guide them to think about that and their voice and using their voice?
Well, I would tell them I would definitely tell them to use their voice because they have something unique to say, and to just say it, not think about what other people are saying, not to copy what popular people are saying, but just to put their unique voice out there, because they'll see that there are people who will gravitate towards it. And it could be a small number of people, it could be a large number, it can grow over time. I mean, sometimes you influence just a small group of people, but they influence other people too. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's to be a bigger concentric circle. So it's not always going to be them directly circled around you, but you never know what's going to happen. So you should
Yeah.
put it out there because people deserve to hear from you.
The network node, and the power of sort of tapping into the rails of the network node. Absolutely. My last question is about innovation in practice specifically, but also about how lawyers think about their legal careers. I was speaking to somebody, and they were using the word legal economy versus legal industry. And that's interesting, of course, because legal economy makes it sort of seem like there's a lot of, economies, and well, I can, people can't see you smiling, but you're smiling, and I think the distinction between sort of the legal industry and, let's say, the legal economy. It has a much more innovative sort of undertone, let's say, to it. What do you think? What do you think's happening? Especially whenever it comes to practice? There's, of course, businessification of large law firms and scale and all of this, of course. But what about from the perspective of practice? And then also, how trained lawyers, even if they're practicing, should start to think about their careers maybe a little bit differently. Every time I open up LinkedIn, there's some lawyer turned something
Yeah.
and this as well as anybody else. But yeah, what do you think? What do you think's happening in this legal economy?
So it's funny because, there's always been a segment of solo and small firms that has always been a legal economy in the past. They've always been
Yeah.
innovative. I mean, it hasn't been a big section, but I mean, like the first people who committed spam on the internet were immigration lawyers. They emailed like a whole big listserv of thousands and thousands of people about their services. And solos and smalls have always like used websites to market their practices. Again, not like a whole bunch of them, but just like small. And so I always think of a segment of solo and small practice as being very entrepreneurial and very much part of the legal economy. And these personal injury lawyers, I mean, some of them are just like really on it in terms of, coming up
Yeah.
with innovative ways to market. But, and then in terms of a career, I mean, it's so funny because like when I started my firm, like I remember people or when I graduated from law school, like people's vision of their career was that you would work like 7 to 10 years at a big firm, you become a partner, and then you'd have your corner office and you'd golf on Wednesdays and Fridays, and somebody else would do the work for you, and you'd be there, talking about the same tax law or estate planning law or whatever it is. And I think today things are so different. You've got to be prepared to morph at all times. You have to be a chameleon and be ready to change. And you've got to figure out a way to like keep leveraging what you've done and turn it over into something new. But you've always got to be open to learning new things, because the world just changes so quickly now, and you don't get the benefit of that corner office. It's really hard to rest on your laurels these days, and people aren't going to pay attention to you because you're old stuff. So just keep on learning, keep on moving.
I love that. I think whenever I think of you, I think of just dynamism and the idea of just trying to stack, something else together to see what one and one comes together. And this all the way to, AI courses and sort of trying to build all of this together. It's, I think of a lot. I played a lot of Legos whenever I was a little kid, and I always think of things like Legos. And what I really like about Legos is that, one small piece can allow you to do many different sort of things. And I know that's very abstract, but I know that everybody can kind of pick up on what I'm saying. And that's what it feels like today. I mean, if just to be very practical about it, having a law degree plus in-house and law firm experience combined with good prompt engineering, basically you package that up into legal ops consultant, and that's for real viable in like a very, very, very real way today, You combine that with good audience and branding and LinkedIn, and there you are. You've pivoted yourself in less than a year into something completely different.
I know, it's amazing how fast it can happen too. I mean, that's amazing too. And that's what I like, because I'm not patient. So.
Well, talking about patience. Well, thank you for being very patient with me today and sitting down with me. It was really, really great to go through your legal life and some of the lessons. We talked about so much, just the changing nature of solos. We talked about jumping into my shingle. We talked about, how you've thought about your practice, and then just, of course, what's happening today and sort of how people are packaging many multiple skills together to kind of create their own careers. It's all very, very exciting. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for sitting down with us. You want to plug anything coming up the next 6 months? Of course, please talk about your course that you just put out on AI, but let us know if there's anything else.
So currently have a class on building a custom GPT for your firm, and it is video recordings, but also the source code that we used. I built one for Maryland estate planning. You can reverse engineer the source code for really anything you want to do. And then it also has like ethical disclaimers. So I'm going to be working on some other course materials for AI for marketing for solo and small firms, and kind of training assistants and other staff team members on ways to use it productively. So just watch myshingle.com or follow me on LinkedIn for updates on that.
Beautiful. We love it. All right. Well, we are going to let you go. Thank you so much for sitting down. And thank you to you breaking the fourth wall. Everybody listening here. If you like this, please like, subscribe, let the algo know what you like. We have to play the game with our big algorithm lords to let everybody know what's good. But we do read your comments, and I am looking at the analytics. So please let us know. And Carolyn, thank you so much for sitting down. We will have you back very, very soon, I'm sure.
Great. Thank you too.
All right. Bye, everybody. Take care. Bye.